Hello, my name is June Klein Bacon, and I'm excited to be able to present for you today some information regarding service planning following brain injury screening. This is going to be especially important for those of you that are connected to providers that are doing brain injury screening as a part of your work. So we're excited to have you here today. Just a little bit of background on myself. Again, my name is June. My pronouns are she and her, and I am with the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa as our brain injury project manager and have been with the organization for about 8 years now. For a couple of disclosures and acknowledgements, I would note that I do not have any financial conflicts to disclose for the record. And then our work here at the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa is funded in part by the Brain Injury Services Program of Iowa through contracts that we have with the Department of Public Health. In addition, the content of this presentation is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We ask that you always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions that you may have regarding a medical condition, and please never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you hear during this presentation. A few objectives that I hope to touch on today include reviewing the prevalence information regarding brain injury and multi-occurring conditions and why this matters, establishing frameworks for thinking about programming through the lens of brain development, functional building blocks, and reviewing some accommodation strategy examples to address in your service planning. So I do want to address the importance of lifetime screening for brain injury. Research really indicates that a person's lifetime history of traumatic brain injury is useful for judging current cognitive and emotional states, particularly behavioral or behavior associated with executive functioning. This occurs mostly in the frontal lobe of the brain, and that can include things like planning, impulsivity, addiction, even interpersonal abilities. So, what we're starting to get at here is a person who has compromised functioning. We want to start thinking about supports that can be adapted for those deficits. And as you can see here, there are a few stats that just indicate the prevalence rates for individuals that also have other conditions or life experiences. I would note that one of the powerful stats that stand out to me is that 72% is the percentage of individuals in dual treatment for substance use disorder and a severe mental illness. Um, 72% of those folks reported a history of at least one traumatic brain injury in a study done out in Ohio. So I do think that that's pretty powerful to think about when we're thinking about the people that we're serving that may be accessing other systems as well. So I do want to address impairment related to mild brain injury. 75% of traumatic brain injuries are considered mild. And while most individuals with one uncomplicated mild traumatic brain injury will resolve to baseline, we often know that mild traumatic brain injuries are not treated in a hospital session or even treated at all for some people in a medical facility. Mild traumatic brain injuries are not often visible on a CT scan or even an MRI, and we have to watch for functional changes, which are going to be the hallmark of a diagnosis for concussion or mild traumatic brain injury. We also know that brain injury can often mirror other disabilities or conditions, and so when we're thinking about lasting impairment, some attributing reasons could include repeated exposure, underlying multi-occurring conditions such as addiction or mental illness, as indicated on the previous slide. So we are not treating brain injury, we are looking to address functional challenges and changes that people experience. We're addressing the behavioral health concern in the context of brain injury, and to work to demystify brain injury as a professional for individuals that experience brain injury and work to engage in providing and referring to appropriate supports. As we think about strategies, we definitely want them to be easy to implement and remain person centered while we evaluate the environmental appropriateness of a specific strategy. So I really like these next couple of slides to help us think about the building blocks of brain development. These slides and this concept in terms of building blocks of development come out of a program in Colorado. And it really helps us to visualize how our functioning processes build on each other in this pyramid-like fashion. So we start with our fundamental processes, thinking about memory, processing speed, attention, inhibition, and sensory motor skills. Then we can move into those intermediate processes, higher order processes, as well as that overall functioning. And so you can think about some of those executive functioning pieces, those higher order thinking processes that are going to happen as we age, and also thinking about brain development and understanding that we're really not hitting full capacity with our brain until we're in our mid 20s. And so when we're thinking about the clients that we're serving and the people that we have the opportunity to interact with, understanding that these are the building blocks in maybe, quote unquote normal circumstances. When we start to think about an injury, then that alters the way these building blocks build on each other. So if we just think briefly here about any one of these really being removed from the picture, we can start to visualize what that looks like for the higher level functionings. And here we just have a fairly simple example of somebody having some challenges related to attention, and what that can look like with the other processes, the other functions, and their development moving forward when we don't take into account addressing attention before we start looking at learning processes or executive function in order to attain those higher level goals or higher order thinking. So this slide I think is important to just kind of call attention to. We do have some materials related to this on our website, and I know that the slide itself is pretty challenging to read, so it's really kind of a placeholder for us to think about all of the different functions that our brain has. Our brain manages everything about us, whether that be physical, cognitive, neurobehavioral concepts and functions. And so when we kind of, again, going back to that building blocks of development of our brain, if we have injury to any part of our brain, it affects a lot of different areas. And so while this brain behavior relationship slide gives kind of a rudimentary look at our brain, it does give us some insight to perhaps areas that somebody might struggle with if the area of their brain that was injured, but also to understand that our brain is very interconnected. And when we talk about function and building upon functions like we looked at in that brain development pyramid, it's helpful for us to put into our thoughts around building strategies to manage different deficits within that same theory. So being able to address attention again in order to get us to learning processes, in order to get us to executive function, and what steps we might need to take uh, in terms of adaptations or strategy development to include within our service planning to address those functional challenges that somebody might be experiencing. So, in that same vein of thinking about those building blocks, I would start to challenge you to think about skill versus will. When we have somebody that is experiencing a functional deficit or functional challenge as a result of brain injury, uh, when we look at that versus a lack of skill, we might be able to start thinking, putting our framework and thinking about this in less likely to be thinking about punishment, less likely to be thinking about, being frustrated with that person for, lack of responsiveness or challenges with the goal that they might be working on with you. Um, and start to think about the functional strategies and functional issues that might be part of that picture. To continue to build on the concept of skill versus will, when we're talking about brain injury, often brain injury is a silent epidemic and a silent injury that we don't necessarily see physically like we might see other disabilities or other conditions. So I would invite you to think about when you're thinking about service planning, what skills do you require of your clients? What is essential for them to be able to meet a goal or follow through with a treatment plan? And how might you think about accommodations or even strategy development that would apply because of brain injury and maybe functional deficits that they might have? I would invite you to think about, would you require somebody to ambulate through your building to access your services if they required a mobility aid without that mobility aid? In that kind of same thought, sphere of thought, are you requiring somebody to complete a part of their treatment plan that that perhaps they might need some strategies or accommodations around with the functional challenges that they experience because of their brain injury? And so when we think about that, when we're thinking about service planning and thinking about either accommodations or adaptations to those service plans, we have to back up a little bit and start thinking about how do those functional changes or challenges affect their ability to meet the service goals or meet the treatment goals that you have for your client or for your patient. And so we start to think about how do we identify and describe that function and how that impaired function might interact with the challenges to meet your goals. But then also thinking about, does the person that you're supporting have a strategy in place that they already are working on to manage, say, a memory deficit or an attention deficit? Are they already working on something? And the importance of thinking about trying to streamline what that looks like among other support individuals, natural supports, paid supports, or that person, what they might be doing individually. And if they're not, working with that person to identify a strategy and determine how that strategy is going to be implemented, not just within the context of your service planning, but in other areas of their life. And that's where it might be important for that person to identify who else it might be important to share that strategy development with. Might it be a spouse? Might it be a caregiver of some kind? Or other professionals, paid professionals that are part of that person's service team. So again, I just would like you to take a moment to reflect on what functions must a person possess for your treatment or your service plan to be successful and work backwards from there. When you're thinking about deficits that somebody may have um, to be able to attain or have success with your service plan. So we had the opportunity to work with North Dakota's Brain Injury Resource Network. And while we worked with them, we had the opportunity to build some accommodation tip sheets that we felt were going to be useful for the person that experiences brain injury, their family members and caregivers, as well as professionals that are engaging with them to try to build strategies around different deficits. And so we did have the opportunity to do a review of some different materials that were already created and worked to condense them to be a bit more user friendly. And so I'm confident that Allie will be able to put the website link in the chat. Again, these are available for the professional use, and then we also have separate ones that are available for individuals that may have brain injury and or their family members and caregivers. And so you can see the different ones that we have so far. We do have goals to create more, and would love feedback from you all when you use them. You can certainly get in touch with me and let us know if you have topics that you would like to see tip sheets on, and or the usefulness of the ones that we have created so far. So I do want to give you just a couple of examples. Now, this isn't the exact layout of the PDF that you would print out. Obviously, that would be really hard to read, kind of like my brain behavior relationship slide. But I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of how the components lay out in those accommodation tip sheets. So the first one we have here is delayed processing. And so each of the tip sheets gives you a definition of what delayed processing might be for a person, particularly that is experiencing brain injury. And then it will give you some information on what you might look for somebody that maybe isn't able to sit down with you and say, "Oh, I have, delayed processing deficit." But this might give you, in terms of what you could look for, some key thoughts around, what challenges is this person experiencing while I'm working to provide support to them, work through a service plan or a treatment plan with them. And so it just gives you some ideas of what you might be able to look for. And then it does provide a few accommodation considerations. Let me be clear, these are not silver bullets, right? These accommodation tip sheets are just a starting point of a conversation with people, but we did want to just provide opportunities for a starting point. Of course, I would kind of put up there our neuro resource facilitation program to be able to dive deeper, if necessary, through case consultation with you all, and or for referrals for the person that you're providing support to, if they want to engage with our neuro resource facilitation program. They can certainly help dive a little bit deeper into strategy development, and thoughts on what that might look like, and engage in brainstorming, that kind of thing, as well as a variety of other types of phone-based supports. So with a similar layout, this is just another example of a tip sheet that you might be able to pull up on our website. Uh, Impulsivity or inhibition might be something that you might be working with somebody on. And so we have some thoughts here. Again, what is it, to give you a definition or a framework to think about what is impulsivity or inhibition in terms of deficits in that area? What might you be looking for? Um, in your interactions with that person, and then what accommodation considerations might you consider? So I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this one, and actually kind of read into these categories. So, what is it? So, impulsivity is the conscious or unconscious inability to suppress or refrain from engaging on action or thought. So, somebody in this area might have struggles with what I often call, our filter. We all have different levels of our filter, but somebody might say or do things without being able to think through and make judgments on what the consequences might be from something they might say, something they might do, something they might engage in. So that really bleeds into what are you looking for? Do they say or do things without safety, regard to safety? Do they have challenges with knowing when to stop? This person might be in group, a support group or therapy group, and have challenges with knowing when to stop talking, when to stop engaging. Even if things get heightened, that kind of thing, or if they're given a reminder or a prompt to stop engaging in a specific behavior, they may have challenges with that uh, based on injury to their brain. And so then accommodation considerations. There are certainly some things that a person could engage in to think about trying to address issues with impulsivity and inhibition. Um, this can be a very challenging area to work in and think about strategy development. But here are just a few accommodation considerations to begin that conversation. Promoting checklists with step-by-step instructions on what an activity is going to look like, introducing mindfulness. And one thing that I find very important for many people that we interact with is being clear and consistent with expectations, with instructions, and getting feedback from that person to ensure that they have processed that information. But again, here I would not expect just because they're able to regurgitate information or expectations that follow through is going to happen. And so that's where again thinking about strategy development around impulsivity, inhibition, or other deficits becomes really important. So this original slide deck was developed uh, to provide some training specifically for substance use disorder providers. But I think the next couple slides, as we take a look at the 12 steps, uh, can really, be applied, and we can think about, uh, the concepts that we use in our own treatments or programming, and how to alter maybe some of those expectations in a way that meets the needs of somebody with brain injury that may have some cognitive deficits or some changes that don't allow them to adhere to the treatment plan specifically as it's written or traditionally as it's been written or determined. So when we take a look at this step one in the 12 steps, we know, how it traditionally reads. It is asking that a person admit that substances do not make their problems better. And so here it would be important perhaps to think about concrete definitions. Um, you know, who do you want off your back and why related to substance use? Are there money issues and why? And getting concrete to, I'm spending money on alcohol, I'm spending money on other substances, and I'm not able to pay my phone bill. I'm not able to pay, my rent, those kinds of things, or afford groceries. And then look at what it is that family and friends may want. So when we're thinking about admitting that substances will cause my life to be out of control, if I continue to use substances, then I may no longer be in a healthy relationship, or I may end up having a divorce, or I may no longer be able to see my children. If I continue to use substances, I may not be able to maintain a job and therefore not be able to pay my bills. So you can start putting some concrete examples to some of the concepts that might be used in a treatment plan or a service plan uh, for somebody that may have challenges with thinking about abstract thoughts. So in a similar vein, when we take a look at step two of the 12 steps, which is to come to believe in a power greater than ourselves uh, that could restore us to sanity, we start to dive deeper in that. One, do I believe that someone or a higher power can help put life back in order? And gosh, for somebody that has sustained a brain injury, they might be angry at that higher power due to the injury when their life was changed in an instant. And so when we want to try to break this down into some concrete thinking, perhaps thinking about, I've decided to let others help me make better choices, and defining who those people are, how they're able to help, and again, getting very concrete in our thinking. So if you are wanting to think about reframing some of your program examples or your service examples, start to think about what that looks like to transition it to concrete thoughts. And then when we get into those concrete thoughts, how do we start to break that down into tangible, non-abstract tasks? And so if I'm having to think about getting help, who am I going to get help from? How am I going to ask for help? Uh, do I need help with organizing my calendar? And what does that look like? When I set up an appointment, is my provider going to walk me through getting my phone out and putting that appointment into my calendar? And then on top of that, if you're working with somebody that perhaps has further organizational issues, does transportation need to be arranged? Do they need to check with an employer to get off work? Those kinds of things. And so, when we are able to start to put ourselves in the frame of mind of understanding somebody's functional deficit, and we start to think about the expectations that we might have of a person, um, we can again work backwards to try to get to that goal with understanding that functional deficit. Again, so let's use an example of an appointment. If there's organizational issues, if there's impulse issues, does a checklist make sense? A creation of a checklist to identify what are the steps that it's going to take to get to an appointment on time. For you or I, and I shouldn't speak for you, but most of the time, if I know that I have an appointment, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on a Tuesday, I need to double check to see if I have anything else scheduled. I need to perhaps talk to my supervisor to make sure that I can leave work to get there on time. If I have any transportation issues, I'm going to need to, deal with those ahead of time, not, at 1:45, 15 minutes before I need to be at my appointment. I may need to even think about what attire is going to be appropriate. What do I need to bring to that appointment? So again, hopefully this is kind of drilling down for you the different things that you might need to think about when we reframe how we deliver our expectations to somebody and what our expectations are, in addition to framing what their capabilities are with meeting those expectations. So, through this session, hopefully, you've heard a few examples of why it is important for us to think about screening for brain injury. But screening for brain injury is only the first step. We need to then start thinking about what are the next steps. What does program planning, service planning, treatment planning look like when we know that there's a potential brain injury for our client or the patient that we're seeing? Um, of course, we would like to indicate when we do a screening for brain injury, we know that that's not a diagnosis of brain injury. So, in the event that we have to talk about diagnosis, there's other steps that would be included, right? But knowing that there's a possibility of brain injury, and then going to think about the different skills and functions that could be uh, impacted by possible brain injury, we can really start to take a look at how people interact with us and what function level might they need us to meet them in our services. And so when we know that we're starting to build some acumen around brain injury. We are screening our clients for brain injury or lifetime history of brain injury and starting to take a look at what that impairment might look like. We then can start to move to the next steps of taking a look at our service plan, taking a look at our interactions with the clients that we're serving, and adjust and accommodate for those impairments with the hope that we can start to see more success for the clients that we're serving if we might add this layer of knowledge into our interactions with them. And of course, we have other steps that we want to start thinking about too. We want to continue to, with that first step of thinking about training for ourselves and for our staff. There then also becomes this component of do we start to provide education to our clients about brain injury, and how do we connect them to the resources that they might need? I'll throw a pitch in there for our neuro resource facilitation program, of course, for individuals that use screen that screen positive for brain injury. We are happy to take those referrals to start talking with them about what does looking for diagnosis look like. But before that, how do we start thinking about what education they might need around brain injury to continue down that path? And then, of course, provide some support with making those appropriate client referrals, thinking about um, if diagnosis is important, if further testing or treatment is important or necessary, what that looks like as well. So I do want to use this opportunity to let folks ask questions, give out some clarifying information, of course, and see where we go. But I do want to note, while you guys are thinking about your questions and getting those put into the chat, I do want to just review again how you can connect to our Neuro Resource Facilitation Program. We have a couple of different opportunities for you. First, if you are not an Iowa Brain Injury Resource Network member uh, and you are a professional that serves people in the community, you might be serving people knowing that they have brain injury or not, and we would like to be able to talk with you about opportunities that joining IBERN might fit for you. Joining IBERN is a free opportunity to you. It comes through funds through our contract with the Department of Public Health to be able to provide materials for you to have on hand or electronically have to give out to people that you come into contact with through the work that you're doing that might have brain injury. That might include the person with brain injury themselves and or family members. In addition to that, we have our Neuro Resource Facilitation Program. Neuro Resource Facilitation is an evidence-based service that is available here in Iowa for individuals that have brain injury, their family members and caregivers, and professionals that are serving them. So when we're looking at trying to get connected to that service, we do have a toll-free line or an 855 line that I'll have here up on the screen in a moment. We also have an email address that you are able to provide to folks to connect with our Neuro Resource Facilitation Program. Again, that can be the person that may have brain injury. It may be a family member or caregiver of that person. And then the piece that I also want to address is for you as a professional engaging with people that may have brain injury or that are diagnosed with brain injury. You may certainly call into our Neuro Resource Facilitators and get connected to ask questions, to get technical assistance or case consultation on a specific case. Those are options as well. Lastly, I do want to highlight our direct referral program. For members that are part of the network, the Iowa Brain Injury Resource Network, we have a direct referral program. So typically to get into our Neuro Resource Facilitation services, that is something that is done by the individual with brain injury or the family member calling themselves. And we know that that can be challenging, particularly when people are new to services or trying just to navigate life with brain injury. And so for our members that are screening for brain injury, for our network members that are aware of diagnosis of brain injury, we can also set up opportunities for direct referral. And what that means is that it puts the onus on us to attempt to get in contact with those individuals rather than you just kind of handing over a pamphlet or materials, which of course can be useful, but for some people making that extra step to connect to our resource facilitation program can be challenging. So we have that opportunity as well. Love to hear from you, love to see who might be interested in connecting to that program. Any parts of that components of that program we can certainly talk further about by setting up an appointment and chatting by Zoom or chatting by phone to explore what's right for you for the services that you're providing and your organization. All right, and as I mentioned, we've got some information here on how to contact the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa to talk about any questions that you might have, to refer folks to our Neuro Resource Facilitation Service, or to get connected with me to talk about the Iowa Brain Injury Resource Network. We can absolutely do that as well through these avenues.